Okay, well, just a couple of things to add to that. As you know, the government in Germany changed a few weeks ago to a different coalition, part of which is now in favour of extending the lives of the nuclear power plants rather than phasing them out. But on the other hand, the good news is that renewable energy now is such a big business in Germany and has now considerable industrial clout, possibly beginning to be comparable to the industrial clout of the fossil and nuclear fuel lobbies, that most people consider it very unlikely that the renewables industry will suffer too much from the political change of the environment. And because it's acquired such a high momentum of its own, already employing 250, 300,000 people in Germany producing wind turbines and solar PV and biomass and so on. So that's quite good news. Okay, we'll move to some tentative conclusions now, although I'm very much open to modifying these conclusions after I've heard the discussions today. CAT's zero carbon Britain scenarios may seem idealistic and over-ambitious, and they certainly seemed that at first, but already the UK government and the UK Climate Change Committee is moving in that direction. The UK Energy Research Centre's models do show that there are many routes to an 80% carbon reduction by 2050, some of which don't involve nuclear power and carbon capture and storage. And the UK Energy Research Centre's DREAD scenario, as it's called, augmented by CAT, offers another interesting way forward. As the video has just shown, the integration of the rare renewables is technologically feasible. In the book that Brian Wade-Durand I edited a couple of years ago, to which Brian very kindly contributed, also demonstrates, we think, pretty satisfactorily, that the variability of renewables isn't a showstopper. It does have to be coped with, but it's not the ultimate. It's not a killer. The relevance of all this to Ireland, I hesitate to say much because I've not been asked to do that, and also I've been away from Ireland so long and out of touch. But it would have seemed to me that even just by scaling things down by about 10 to 1 in the ratio of populations, you get an idea of what the UK numbers would mean in Ireland. And Ireland also has the benefit of a much lower population density, greater potential for wind, biomass and marine. So the progress of Ireland to a zero carbon society could be even easier than in Britain. And also, as Brian has been a major advocate of it, the European supergrid would provide the connections to the rest of Europe, which would enable Ireland to, if anything, export power, electricity to the European nations. So you're, if anything, I think, better placed than the UK to move towards a zero carbon society. But I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you've got to say about that. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Godfrey, and we're actually also, good news, we're very much on time. So on that very positive note, we see that that very final point, that actually we have a less difficult problem because of our lower population density here in Ireland. So, you know, that bodes well for the future. Also, that although we didn't entirely plan for it, we probably have just a minute or two. We could have, if anyone would like to ask a quick question or make a quick comment. We've got to.
Yeah, sure, sorry. Yeah, fine.
So any questions or comments before we break for coffee? Yep, good man,
It's kind of a silly question, really.
Maybe introduce yourself.
I work in the offshore wind sector.
Oh, well, fine.
I work in policy originally. If we become a net exporter, as you indicated, Brian, and we're exporting renewable energy, which seems to be on the cards, it does seem to be the way the government is going. How would you view that from an academic point of view? If we've managed to eliminate fossil fuels in this country, and we are entirely renewable, and we are exporting renewables, are we a negative carbon society?
Oh yeah, well yes, that depends a bit on how you do this. Sometimes I would have thought that would be indeed the case, yes. In fact, the people at CAT, again, I've got an inkling of what they're thinking is that they would possibly, now in their zero carbon 2 scenario, envisage using some fossil fuels, but in order to cover deficits when the wind isn't blowing. But they would envisage the overall output of the renewables over a year to exceed their use of fossil fuels. So therefore, there would be a net zero carbon, even if it's not always zero at any one time. But yes, I mean, I would have thought that would be entirely the case. Yes. Yeah. I mean, there are other ways of going to negative carbon through biochar, and I mean, there's another big subject there which we could go into.
Basically sinking carbon.
Yes, sinking, exactly. Yeah, but I mean, maybe that's a different subject.
It's already pretty ambitious to be going to zero, but I just wonder
it could be
from a
negative.
calculation point of view, would you regard that as negative?
Yeah, no, I see. I mean, providing you make the huge investment required, I see no reason why it shouldn't be. And even if that, Brian and I were talking about this over just a coffee the other day. I mean, even the embodied energy to produce the wind turbines, of course, at the moment comes from fossil fuels. But of course, if as time goes on, the energy required to produce the wind turbines also comes from renewables, then the embodied energy also goes down. So that's again maybe looking rather far ahead. But one doesn't have to be stuck with fossil fuels forever. Although, as Brian says, it seems a little unrealistic now to envision a completely zero carbon society in the short term anyway. Although in the long term it should be possible.
Well, I was thinking of some of my thermodynamic experts, or probably some of them in the audience. It's the question whether, I think in fact there was one or two comments fed back to us about, is it, are we breaking the laws of thermodynamics by suggesting? I said, well, I take responsibility. I tend to be very black and white when we're kind of having a more general kind of discussion. So I said, I'll take responsibility for the zero carbon title. That we can definitely go in that direction. But it's interesting. In fact, we could actually, as an exporter, there's another pretty good reason why given the current parallel state of the country, is that we have to look to exports and major exports. So we can be the low-cost producer of green electricity in Europe, which is a very positive possibility.
A huge job generator too. As you could the whole Green New Deal. There's a lot of talk about that in Britain. But again, Ireland could be racing ahead of it. And also Denmark shows what small countries can do. It isn't the case that you need to be a big nation like Britain or Germany to do a lot. Denmark very much shows how a small nation such as Ireland could really move into the front as front running here.
Andy Froome, energy consultant, I work in the residential sector in Belfast. The Carbon Trust seems to hold a lot of hope for offshore wind and things like fuel cells, but it seems like the application of those will actually depend on a smart grid being put in. Do you think there's the will to make a smart grid happen?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, a lot of people are talking about smart grids. The government's talking about it. The utilities are talking about it. I think it probably will have, of course, you have to be careful what you mean by a smart grid. There'll be degrees of smartness, and you can think of sort of slightly unintelligent smart grids and highly intelligent ones, and various possibilities in between. And even electric car charging produces all sorts of problems. Where will the charge points be? Will they be smart? Will they be? How will you pay? It all gets fiendishly complex. But certainly, there's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of enthusiasm for it. I don't know the answer to how quickly or otherwise it will get implemented. You probably know as well as I do.
The question of how invest and legacy
in
the UK in terms of
quite powerful, actually. Well, absolutely. A lot of the UK industry is owned abroad now. I mean, we've got E.ON, RWE, EDF. There aren't many indigenous UK suppliers that are actually UK-based. So, and those big international suppliers, I mean, I think they've probably got mixed motives. I think they probably do want to move to a smart grid, but probably at their own pace, at a pace that doesn't challenge their investments in the present system. I would conjecture. I mean, I don't know. I haven't got a secret sort of source of information on the thinking of the boards of EDF and E.ON and RWE. But so your guess might be as good as mine.